Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us. Um, so we're really pleased to welcome Bhikkhu Bodhi to join us for this session. We're really honored to have his time for him to join us. And before we start, I'm going to give a quick introduction to who Bhikkhu Bodhi is, so we can have a really productive conversation. So Venerable Bhikkhu Bodhi is an American Buddhist monk from New York City. He obtained a bachelor's in philosophy from Brooklyn College in 1966 and a PhD in philosophy from Claremont Graduate School in 1972. After completing his university studies, he traveled to Sri Lanka, where he received novice ordination in 1972 and a full ordination in 1973. For many years, he was a president and editor of the Buddhist Publication Society in Sri Lanka. He has been living in Chuang Yin Monastery since 2006. Venerable Bodhi has many important publications to his credit, either as author, translator, or editor. Most recently, a translation of the entire Anguttara Nikaya, the numerical discourses of the Buddha. In 2008, together with several of his students, Venerable Bodhi founded Buddhist Global Relief, a nonprofit supporting hunger relief, sustainable agriculture, and education in countries suffering from chronic poverty and malnutrition. In May 2013, he was elected president of the Buddhist Association of the United States. So thank you so much for joining us.
Okay. Okay. Thank you for the invitation. And I'm glad that we could connect, because just a few minutes ago, I was searching for the Zoom link for this call. And I looked through the whole backlog of emails connected with the talk at Purdue University, but I didn't see a Zoom link. So then I wrote to Deirdre, who is, I think, on the administration, and she sent my email to Jia Yin. And so just a few minutes ago, I got the link to connect with you.
Yeah, Venerable Bhikkhu, I'm so sorry. Bhikkhu Bodhi, I'm sorry about the link. It seems like we have a mess here. I apologize for that. Sorry.
No, that's okay. That's okay. Okay, so the topic that I was going to speak about, I thought it would be a topic that's relevant to university students, and that is how we can use the teachings of the Buddha as guideposts for answering the question of how we can live a life that's truly and deeply meaningful. And often people who have a superficial acquaintance with Buddha's teaching think that Buddhism, or they identify Buddhism in a very narrow sense with just the practice of meditation, now particularly the practice of mindfulness, and the aim of getting liberation from detaching oneself from all worldly or mundane involvements and gaining a kind of purely transcendental state of liberation. But when we really look deeply into the discourses of the Buddha, we see that they have an extremely practical relevance to virtually all aspects of our lives, that the Buddha lays down teachings that are relevant to people in virtually every condition of their lives, regarding especially many teachings given to lay people, not just the monastics, but to lay people, and how to live an ethical life, how to earn one's living in accordance with right livelihood, and how within the context of a worldly life, a life of ordinary involvements, commitments, family, one could still develop spiritually and eventually reach the higher stages of realization. In a book that I had published, I think it was 2005, 2006, it's called In the Buddha's Words, I classified the different discourses of the Buddha according to three goals towards which the Buddha's teaching is directed. And I base this on a sort of commentarial way of analyzing the teachings of the Buddha. So we have the three goals. One is well-being and happiness in this very life. So these are the teachings that relate to establishing peaceful, harmonious relations with others, fulfilling one's family responsibilities, earning one's living by right livelihood, and even teachings that are given to kings and ministers of state on how to properly govern and administer their countries. Okay, then the next major aim of the Buddha's teaching is the preparations for a fortunate rebirth, because the Buddha teaches that our life doesn't come to an end with the death, the physical death of the body, but that the stream of consciousness continues beyond death and takes on a new mode of existence. In other words, what we call rebirth, or sometimes commonly called reincarnation. And so we take on a new existence in some other form, either back into the human realm or into some other realm of existence. And the particular mode of rebirth that we take is determined by our karma. The word karma means our intentional actions, our behavior of body, speech, and thought. And so as a practitioner of the Buddha's teaching, if we really take the whole scope of the teaching seriously, we want to live not only to achieve well-being and happiness, peace and harmony in this life, but we also want to ensure ourselves of a fortunate rebirth in our next existence and the existences beyond that. And so the Buddha lays down a map of the different courses of action that lead to different realms of existence, that lead to rebirth in other forms. And of course, what he prescribes is that we should abandon, give up, avoid those types of actions that lead to lower forms of rebirth and to misery and suffering in the future, and pursue those types of actions that lead to well-being and happiness in the future. But then, even if we achieve a happy rebirth, a fortunate rebirth, even in one of these celestial or heavenly or divine realms, still life, the Buddha teaches that life in all states of existence is impermanent, imperfect, transient, to be followed by rebirth someplace else. That life in all the different realms of existence is insecure, inadequate, and fundamentally defective. So therefore, the ultimate goal of the Buddha's teaching is to break the bonds that keep us tied to the cycle of repeated birth and death, and to gain liberation. So those are the three levels or three goals of the Buddha's teaching: to achieve well-being and happiness in this present life, to establish the conditions for a fortunate rebirth in our next existence, and ultimately to pursue and develop that course of practice that will bring liberation from the beginningless cycle of birth and death that the Buddha calls samsara, and to bring the attainment of the state of liberation that is called nirvana or nibbana. Okay, so to live a life that's deeply and truly meaningful, we should be practicing in a way that's aimed at achieving these three goals, even though we have to sometimes order them according to our own personal priorities. So if one has the aspiration to break the cycle of birth and death right here and now, then one's inclination will be to go forth into the homeless life of a monk and devote almost all one's time to cultivating the path of meditation. But the Buddha doesn't expect all of his followers. In fact, he expects only a small proportion of his followers to pursue that direct path to liberation. And so we find in the Buddha's teachings many, many guidelines for living a life of well-being, peace, and happiness here and now, and establishing the conditions for a fortunate rebirth in the future. And so in the talk that I'm going to give today, I want to look at some of the kinds of qualities that we can develop and the practices that we can undertake to live a life that is in alignment with these three aims: a life that will make our, or to live in a way that will make our life a source of true benefits for ourselves, and that will enable us to bring benefits and happiness to others, to be a good person in the highest sense, a person of true moral integrity, a person of true wisdom who can help others in ways that are meaningful and substantial. And the sutta, a discourse of the Buddha that I like to use as a kind of framework for exploring some of these qualities, is a little discourse of some 12 verses called the Mangala Sutta, the discourse on blessings. And we find this sutta in the Sutta Nipata, an early collection of the Buddha's discourses. But I'm not going to look at the whole sutta, which enumerates 38 blessings or 38 practices that lead to a life of blessings. But I'm only going to select a number of the qualities that contribute to a life of meaning and purpose. And I find it's useful to distinguish the kind of qualities that we develop, that we should develop, into two broad categories. One of these I call virtuous qualities, good qualities of character, and the other class are the practices that lead to wisdom. So what we want to develop in our life to live a life of meaning and purpose is to cultivate a noble character, a worthy character, a character that will shine forth through our actions and our interactions with others, and express in our actions with others the kinds of virtuous qualities that we've cultivated within our own heart. So that is one side, and the other side is wisdom, not only to have good character, but to have understanding, insight into true principles that will be able to guide us in our practice of the Buddha's teachings in order to reap the benefits, the deeper and higher benefits of the Buddha's teaching. When we recite in Pali the praises of the Buddha, we have a list of 9 praises of the Buddha, and one of these points to this integration of virtuous character and wisdom. In Pali, it's Vijja Charana Sampanno. So the Buddha is one who possesses, that's Sampanno, Vijja, which means higher knowledge, accurate, clear knowledge, and Charana. Charana means good character and good conduct. So the Buddha merges, integrates, brings together wisdom and virtuous qualities, virtuous character. And that's what we should try to do in our own efforts to live the Buddha's life. So how do we go about doing this? So the first step that the Buddha mentions in this sutta, the Mangala Sutta, the sutta on blessings, is not to associate with foolish people, but to associate with the wise. So when we're going to set out on a path of life, the Buddha places a great deal of emphasis on forming the right kinds of association, choosing the kinds of people that we are going to establish friendships with, because the relations that we form with others strongly influence our own character, our own perspectives, and our own actions. And there's a passage where the Buddha illustrates this, the need to avoid associating with foolish people, with evil people, and to associate with good and wise people. He illustrates this with 2 similes. He takes the simile first of a stick of fragrant substance, the kind of substance that one makes incense with, and one wraps that up in, oh, I'm sorry, no, it's a leaf. One takes a leaf with a nice fragrance to it, and one uses it to wrap up rotten fish. Then at a later time, when one unwraps that leaf and smells it, even though the leaf itself originally had a nice fragrance, but now it smells like rotten fish. So that illustrates what happens when we associate with bad people, with foolish people. We pick up, even if we are not realizing it at the time, we are picking up their qualities. They're sort of by a kind of process of almost osmosis, that their qualities seep into ourselves and subtly transform our own character, leading it in a negative direction. Whereas if we associate with wise and good people, again, this will influence us by a kind of psychological osmosis. And the Buddha illustrates this again with the simile of taking just a piece of paper, and then you use that paper to wrap some sticks of incense. And then later, when you unwrap the paper and smell it, the paper, which is neutral in itself, picks up the beautiful fragrance of the incense. So that is the way our own character picks up the fragrance, you could say, of the people that we associate with. So that's why at the very outset, we have to be very, very careful of who we associate with. And I've actually noticed this even in my own experience. You know, in monastic life, you might think that all, monks are intrinsically good people, and basically they are. But I remember years ago when I was living in Sri Lanka, there was another Western monk that was living in the same temple where I was living. And this monk would always be speaking critically. He was not a bad person, but his tendency was always to be speaking critically about other monks, always sort of denigrating them, looking for their bad qualities or weak points, putting them down, speaking sarcastically about them, ridiculing them. And I was good friends with this other monk, but after some time I noticed my ways of thinking were changing. And so I came to realize that I too was starting to look for the bad qualities of other people and starting to speak in derogatory ways about other people. And when associating with this other monk, together we would start ridiculing and laughing about the faults of others. But after a short time, I realized, wow, that I am slipping down that rather dangerous slope, and that I'd better, change, change my ways. And so I didn't quite, completely avoid that other monk, but I realized it was necessary to keep a little bit of a distance from him in order to preserve my own, to protect myself from developing that tendency to always be criticizing and ridiculing others. Okay, so we start off with this, we call this the proper orientation, by choosing the right people to associate with. And what do we look for in the kind of people that we associate with? And there's a discourse where the Buddha actually explains, and he's speaking to a layperson, not to other monks, but he's saying, what are the kind of people that you should associate with if you want to be a true follower of the Buddha Dharma? He mentions 4 qualities. It should be a person who has trust in the Buddha Dharma. Should be a person who observes sila, who lives in accordance with the precepts. A person who is of a generous character, who is happy to give and to share with others. And a person who has wisdom. And of course, this doesn't mean that the only people that you associate with should be other followers of the Buddha Dharma, but no matter what religion people are following, whether they're following any religion or not, but the kind of people that you should form close friendships with should be people of good conduct, people who have a generous temperament, and people who have some degree of wisdom. And later, as we go along, we'll start to see what is meant by wisdom in the context of the Buddha's teaching. Okay, so with this kind of orientation through right association, we can come to some of the factors that we have to develop in order to live a life of meaning. And okay, the first verse that treats of this topic is actually the 7th verse in the sutta. Says, Arati virati papa majjapana cha sanyamo upamado cha dhammesu etang mangalam uttamang. So this is the Pali, the translation. Ceasing from bad conduct, stopping bad conduct, and abstaining from bad conduct. Then refraining from the use of intoxicants and being diligent in wholesome practices. So the first thing we have to do is to look at our conduct, at our behavior, and see if we are committing any kind of ethical transgressions. And the Buddha gives us very, very clear accounts of, at least in very basic terms, of what constitutes wrong conduct or bad conduct. So we have various schemes of precepts in Buddhism. The most basic scheme is that of the 5 precepts. So killing, destroying life, stealing, sexual misconduct, the deliberate falsehood, speaking deliberate falsehood or lying, and the use of intoxicating substances. So those are the 5 transgressions. And so one examines one's conduct to see if one is engaging in that kind of behavior. And if it is, then one makes the determination to stop that behavior. So that is stopping bad conduct, ceasing from bad conduct. But the next one is abstaining from bad conduct. There's a difference between ceasing and abstaining. Ceasing means that you examine your present conduct to see if you're engaging in those kinds of transgressions. And if you are, then you lay down the strong determination to stop those types of actions. To abstain from wrong conduct means that you make the deliberate determination to abstain from those types of conduct in the future. So it's not only that you change your conduct now, but you form the determination to abstain from those types of actions in the future. And when you make that determination, that sort of sets up an internal monitor or guide. So when you find the temptation to engage in those kinds of transgressions, then you know that you've made the determination to stop that behavior. And that will serve as a kind of voice of conscience that pulls one back when one is tempted to engage in any kind of transgression. So normally within the Buddhist tradition, that is done by formally undertaking the precepts. So usually in the presence of a monastic person, or if you're on your own in front of a Buddha altar, you make the determination. I determine that I will abstain from killing, from stealing, from sexual misconduct, from deliberately speaking falsehood, and from the use of intoxicants. But in this verse, what's interesting is that the Buddha singles out abstaining from the use of intoxicants as a separate factor. even though it's one of the 5 precepts, but he gives it special emphasis as one of the foundation stones of personal ethics. And I did some years ago, a little comparison between, there's another sutta in which the Buddha speaks about the negative consequences of indulging in intoxicants. So in this sutta, he mentions 6 dangers of indulging in intoxicants. So he mentions that leads to loss of wealth, increase of quarrels, makes one susceptible to illness. It gives one a evil reputation. It leads to shameless exposure of the body, and it weakens one's intellect. And then out of curiosity, I looked on the internet, because now you could find any kind of information you want. You just put the appropriate search words into Google and then hit the button, and then you get a multiple answers to your questions. So I did a search to find out negative consequences or something like that of alcohol addiction. And what I found corresponds so closely to what the Buddha said, 2,500 years ago. So this is what is said: using alcohol in large amounts can cause injuries, such as unintentional injuries, such as car crashes, burns, and drowning. And I think now, if you look at automobile collisions, such a high percentage of them are due to the use of alcohol, driving under the influence of alcohol or other drugs. Okay, then intentional injuries, such as gun violence, domestic violence, family problems, and broken relationships. The Buddha says increase of quarrels. High blood pressure, stroke, and various diseases. So the Buddha says susceptibility to disease. Nerve damage, okay, that's a kind of disease. Permanent damage to the brain. Perhaps that would correspond to the weakening of the intellect. Okay, so we have some of these principles of leading a life of moral integrity. Begins on the negative side with stopping misconduct, refraining, abstaining from misconduct through the deliberate undertaking of precepts, and refraining from the use of intoxicants, alcohol and other intoxicants. And so the Buddha, like his typical way of presenting his teaching, is to first show the negative side that has to be controlled and eliminated, and then to show the positive qualities that have to be developed, the good qualities. And I compare this a little bit to the kind of process, if we have like a gardener who's given a plot of land and he's told, develop this plot of land into a beautiful garden. So what does the gardener do? The first task he has to do is to remove all of the weeds. This plot of land has been overgrown with weeds. So first he has to remove the weeds, the rocks, the stones and pebbles, and clear all of that away, clear away any kind of undergrowth. And then he cultivates the soil, spreads fertilizer over the soil, makes the soil rich and fertile. Then he'll plant the seeds, and then in time, those seeds that are planted will bring forth beautiful flowers and bushes and other things. And so the Buddha proceeds in the same way. First, clear off all of the negative, unwholesome qualities of the mind. And then on that basis, when we have a clear mental ground, then we can plant the seeds of the beautiful, wholesome qualities. Okay, so that takes us to the next couple of verses, which are concerned, I call these the verses that are concerned with cultivating inner virtues and wisdom. Okay, so the next verse says, first I'll recite it in Pali, then translate it, elaborate on it. Garavocha nivatocha santuticha gatanyuta. Actually, what I'm going to do is to take the verses enumerated, the qualities enumerated in these two verses. First, the qualities of inner virtues, and then the qualities that lead to wisdom, because both verses have some of the qualities pertain to virtues, some of them pertain to wisdom. So the qualities that pertain to developing inner virtues are reverence, humility, contentment, gratitude, patience, and being open to advice, open to correction from others. Those are the qualities of inner virtues. Then we have the qualities that lead to the development of wisdom, listening to the Dharma at the proper time, seeing renunciants or monastics, and discussing the Dhamma at the proper time. So we could take these qualities and we go through them one by one. So the Buddha begins here with reverence or respect. And this is sort of the starting point of spiritual development, spiritual and moral development. Because if one is overcome by arrogance, by a sense of self-importance, by having a big ego, then one is incapable of really learning the Dhamma or developing properly in the Buddhist path. So when one approaches the Dhamma, one has to approach with an attitude of respect and reverence, a kind of openness to accepting the teaching. And traditionally, within the traditional Buddhist framework, we have like three main objects of reverence. That is the Buddha himself as the supremely enlightened teacher, the Dharma as the teacher, as the teaching, and the Sangha as the community, the monastic community that preserves and transmits the teaching. But what is essential is here, I don't want to focus on the objects of reverence, but on reverence as an attitude of mind. Because when you lack this reverence, then when you come to the Dhamma, you come to it with the attitude that I know everything, or I'm an expert, I'm an authority, or I'm a very important person. And then one is not able to accept teachings and to bring them into your mind. But when you meet discussions, people who are discussing the Dhamma, then you think that you know everything and that you can dictate the interpretations to others. Yeah, one thing that I've seen on the internet, usually I don't go onto internet chat rooms on the Dhamma, because what I've seen sometimes, but occasionally I've sort of peeked into them to see what goes on in these discussion groups on the internet. And I think this is a danger that comes when people engage in discussions without face-to-face encounters, that everybody's, or at least many of the people who engage in these discussions, think that they are the experts on the Dhamma. And so people present their own point of view, and they see that their task is to refute and reject the opinions of others. So very few people come to this task, to these discussions with an open attitude of reverence, wishing to learn. But rather people come with the idea that I am the expert, I am going to be teaching the others. And so the essential quality for learning is reverence. And reverence is this kind of combines kind of attitude of respect, veneration, regarding certain, let's say, ideals as the ideals that one takes for oneself. So we look up to the Buddha as being the source of our wisdom. In our efforts to cultivate the Buddha's path, we always have to sort of humble ourselves before the Buddha with an attitude of reverence. And so reverence goes hand in hand with the next quality, humility. And humility doesn't mean that you denigrate yourself, that you devalue yourself or put yourself down, but it means that you don't blow yourself up, inflate yourself, but it means that you take the approach that I am willing to learn from others, to accept advice from others. And so we have reverence and humility are sort of what opens you to accepting the Dharma. I remember there's a story that comes down in the Zen tradition that I came across many, many years ago. There was a professor who came to meet a Zen master, a meditation master. And the professor was very proud of his learning. Maybe he was a professor of Buddhist studies. And so he came to meet the Zen master ostensibly to get some advice from the Zen master. But he started talking, explaining his own interpretations of Buddhism, referring to the many articles on Buddhism that he had written. And the Zen master was just sitting quietly. And then the Zen master at one point said, "Would you like some tea?" And then the professor said, "Oh yes, I would appreciate some tea." So the Zen master had some tea served on a tray with 2 cups and a pot of tea. Then he took the pot of tea and started to pour the tea into the professor's cup until the tea reached the top of the lid. But then the Zen master continued to pour the tea into the cup until the tea was overflowing the cup onto the tray. And then the professor said, wait, my cup is already filled. Why are you overflowing the cup with tea? And then the Zen master said, well, you wrote to me, you said that you wanted to speak to me to get some advice. And yet you've been doing all of the talking and not even asking me any questions. So you're so full of your own knowledge that you don't even have the reverence and humility to open yourself and empty yourself, even to ask some question of me. So you're just like the cup that's full of tea. And I'm trying to show you this by pouring the tea over your cup until it flows onto the tray. So when we come to the Dharma, we have to come just like an empty cup, ready to accept the tea, and not like we're a full cup of tea, so that anything that that others try to pour into us will just overflow. Okay, the next quality that's mentioned here is contentment. And I think this is a very, very important quality, not only in our personal life, but in our whole society. And of course, it's the innate tendency of the mind not to be content. And yet, what the Buddha teaches is that the way to liberation lies in reducing and ultimately removing craving. So craving is the drive, the impulse to always acquire more. And it could be in material terms, craving for more wealth, craving for more pleasure, could be craving for position, fame, status, power. And so the human mind has this innate tendency never to be content, no matter what one has. So we have people in our society, in this country, multi-millionaires, billionaires, people, maybe I don't have to mention any names, but you have $5 billion, and then you see that there's the CEO of some other corporation who maybe has a salary or maybe has $10 billion. And so if you have $5 billion, you don't have anything to spend it on. You don't need $5 billion to live happily or comfortably. But if you see somebody else has $10 billion, you're not content because they have more than you do. And so this drive to always acquire more wealth, position, power, fame, never allows a person to live happily. And when you don't have contentment, no matter what one possesses, the mind is always in a state of stress, anxiety, discontent, displeasure, never able to rest, but always scheming and plotting and pushing oneself to gain more, which can lead not only to conflicts with others, broken relationships, inner alienation and isolation, but can also have negative impact on one's health. And when one doesn't have any contentment, then one misses the appreciation of everything around one. Just a few days ago, I saw on YouTube, there was a nice little video by a woman film producer, originally from India, but I think she was living in Britain, and she had gone back to India to sort of rediscover her roots. And she was speaking to various people that she met, especially religious people, the swamis and spiritual teachers in India. And there was one very simple man that she was speaking to, an elderly man sitting under a tree. He wasn't a swami or a monk, but just like an ordinary householder, but one that people regarded as being wise. And he was telling her that he sees, and he could speak English, so he gets to speak to many foreign visitors. And he says that he sees wealthy foreign visitors coming here, and they're very rich. And he speaks to them, and he can see that they don't have any appreciation of the natural world. And he says, I don't have much money myself, but I sit here in this garden under the tree, and I could look up and I enjoy watching the birds. And I see the tree when it brings flowers. And then in the autumn, I see how the leaves drop from the tree. I enjoy the change of seasons. And so I'm content with my life the way it is. But these other people coming from the Western countries, never content, always looking around, trying to find other things, but not appreciating what is present right in front of them. So when you develop this quality of contentment, then you can start appreciating your natural surroundings and enjoying your life, appreciating your life. And this doesn't mean that you have to force yourself to live in poverty. I mean, of course, you need a certain amount to be able to live comfortably. But once you have enough to support yourself materially, then it's time to realize when one has earned enough, one could be content with living a simple life, and then one could start appreciating the people around one and the natural surroundings. And then that gives inner fulfillment, inner happiness. Okay, then the next virtuous quality that's mentioned in this discourse is gratitude. And this is, again, it's a quality, a very important virtue to develop in our life. Because usually, particularly in the American culture, we're always taught that we have to be the self-made man, a person who achieves all of his accomplishments on his own. And when we achieve our goals, then we could pride ourselves on our accomplishments. And then we tend to dominate others and lord over others without realizing how others have contributed to our own well-being. So one of the reflections that we're taught to practice is to do a reflection on gratitude, to start thinking of all of the people who have helped us and benefited us in the course of our life. So one can start maybe with your parents. Think about how your parents have helped you, even when you were a little helpless child, little baby. It was your mother who looked after you, hopefully with a lot of love and self-sacrifice. Your father who worked hard at his job. Well, nowadays, both parents are actually working. I'm still thinking, I'm sorry, in 1950s terms. But the parents who worked hard at their jobs to earn money, to bring you up, to put you through school, put you through college, to develop gratitude towards your parents, gratitude towards your maybe brothers and sisters, if you've had a friendly relation with them, gratitude towards your friends, towards your teachers. And when we start reflecting in this way, we can start expanding the range of our gratitude until it becomes almost all-encompassing. For example, like when I, here at the monastery, I reflect when I receive the food every day. I reflect like, I don't have to go shopping. I don't have to do cooking, but I just sit here in my room, and then at twice a day, they'll hear the sound of the gong. And then I just go up to the dining hall and the food is ready for me. But I think with gratitude of the people, there are some cooks here. Of course, that they're working for a salary, but still they're working hard to prepare the food. And then I think of the farmers who grew the food and the truckers who brought the food that was grown to the markets, and the people from the markets who sold the food. And so I could, when I reflect in this way, I could see that the food that sustains my body has come to me through an extensive network of perhaps encompassing hundreds or thousands of people. Similarly, the building that I live in was constructed by other people. The robes that I'm wearing, the people, the supporters of this monastery who support me. So when we reflect in this way, it develops this very, very broad sense of gratitude, really extending, that could extend throughout the whole country, even maybe extending to the United Nations, which is to some extent ensuring that we don't have international conflicts that are creating so much havoc and destruction. And then when we pursue this idea of gratitude further, we could even develop gratitude towards the earth itself for supporting us and providing us with the crops that turn into food, towards the sun for providing us the warmth of the weather that sustains life on earth, gratitude towards the change of seasons so that it never gets, well, sometimes it does get extremely cold, sometimes extremely hot, but at least we have a climate that can support human life. And so, and then gratitude towards the water that we drink, and hopefully we'll be able to preserve clean drinking water. So we could develop this very far-reaching sense of gratitude, which enriches our own life and makes us wish to repay that gratitude by doing good to others. So when we have a very strong sense of gratitude towards others, then we wish to benefit others and to help others as a way of showing, even if they aren't the ones who have actually benefited us directly, but we can see that life itself is a kind of very integrated circle of interdependence. And so when others benefit us, we want to contribute and sustain that cycle of mutual support by serving and benefiting others in turn. Okay, so we have reverence, humility, contentment, gratitude. Okay, the next virtue of character mentioned here is patience. And this is a very, very important quality to develop because patience is recommended as the antidote, the remedy towards anger and resentment. So particularly in our relationships with other people, probably the primary cause of breaking of friendships, the primary cause for conflict between people is lack of patience, anger. Anger, sometimes it begins as little waves of resentment, little ripples of irritation. And then as those waves of irritation and annoyance gain momentum, then it can turn into a fierce and violent wave of anger, which can lead to destruction and harm to others. And then some people, when anger becomes a persistent temperament of character, then everything that happens to them, they feel displeased with. So if the weather turns to be a little bit cool, then they become upset. It's too cold. If it gets a little bit warm, it's too hot. If somebody serves me a meal, I don't like this food. If somebody gives me a cup of tea, there's too much sugar, not enough sugar. So I'm always, one is complaining, either verbally or mentally, so that the person who lacks patience can never dwell happily. So the antidote to anger and to this violent disposition of the mind is patience, being patient with other people, being patient with outer conditions. And when we're told that patience is well, maybe I should come back to this later. Let me just take now the next quality mentioned as a virtue, which in a sense is the key to all of the others. And that is being open to advice, being open to correction from others. Because we all have naturally, sort of inherently, we all have our faults, we all have our weaknesses, we all have engaged in certain types of misbehavior, or sometimes our behavior reveals distressful or disturbing qualities of character, unwholesome emotions, destructive emotions. And we're not able to see these qualities ourselves because there's a tendency of the mind only to recognize our strong qualities, not to see our faults and weaknesses. So that's why we're very dependent in order to improve ourselves, to improve our characters. We're very dependent on feedback from others, and to be responsive to the feedback from others. For the feedback from others to be truly helpful to us, we need this quality called suvachasita, openness to advice, which means being willing to accept the advice from others, being willing to accept criticism from others without turning against them and becoming vindictive and striking back against them. But being able to accept the advice from others and correct our faults. And so when the Buddha set up the monastic order, he placed a lot of stress on this as the key to the growth in the spiritual life of the monastic persons, that they should be ready to criticize one another, not in an angry way, but in a gentle way, being ready to criticize one another, but also being willing to accept criticism from others and to change one's ways. So he says that is the way one grows and develops, by being open to the advice of others. And when others point out one's faults, or when one recognizes faults within oneself, one question that might come up is, how do I change myself? Okay, let us say I have a tendency to get angry easily, particularly when I get into discussions with others about understanding Buddhism, and others have a different opinion. Then I get angry. I think my opinion is right, the other person is wrong. This was a problem, true confession, that I had when I first began learning Buddhism from my first teacher. When I was in graduate school in California, my first teacher was a Buddhist monk from Vietnam. And he had been a monk for like 11, 12 years, or maybe even longer than that, maybe 15 years. I had just been reading about Buddhism for a few months, but when he would be teaching me, I would base myself on some of the books that I was reading, and then I would argue with him, thinking that I know Buddhism better than he does. And I would become so angry and upset and self-righteous, and it really soured my relationship with my teacher. But then one time, then he called me into his room, and he told me that this is really going to be a big obstacle to your development in the Dharma. And he told me, this is what you have to do. Every day, he said, you have to do this reflection. When I'm having a discussion on the Dhamma, I might be right, I might be wrong. But the important point is not to be right and not to be afraid of being wrong. But the important point is to recognize the truth, to determine the truth. And he said, do this as a daily reflection. And I did that as a daily reflection for a long time, and it helped me to change over time. And so this was a kind of lesson for me, that the way to change one's faults is to first recognize what the faults are, and then make, as part of one's daily practice, the determination to change that fault and develop the positive quality. So what I often suggest to my students is that don't begin with too big a list of faults, because if you start with a long list of 10 or 20 faults, even if you have them all, then you get discouraged very quickly. But just begin with 3 faults that you might have. Maybe I tend to get angry very easily. I tend to be lazy, to oversleep, or to procrastinate about doing my work. Maybe I tend to be arrogant and self-righteous. So many, many faults. Like if you look at some of the Buddha's teachings, very useful is Majjhima Nikaya, the Middle Length Discourses, Sutta number 7 and Sutta number 8. They have a list. Sutta number 7 has a list of 16 faults. Majjhima Nikaya number 8 has a list of something like 42 or 44 faults. So you can look at those suttas and see what are some of the faults that I have. And, or it could be that you recognize faults not in those lists, but you make the determination every day. I recognize this fault. I'm going to correct myself and develop the opposite quality. So if I tend to get angry, so I make the determination when I'm provoked, I won't get angry, but instead I'll be patient. If you tend to be sort of competitive with others, I won't compete with others, but I will rejoice in the good qualities and accomplishments of others. If I tend to be lazy, then one reflects, I'm not going to be lazy, but whenever I have any task to do, I'm going to do it diligently. So when you do these reflections every day, don't expect to see dramatic change after 2 days, 3 days, or 1 week. But after 3 months, if you look back on yourself, you'll see that you're changing. And after 1 year, you'll see big changes in yourself, and other people will see big changes in you. So just, even if they're not correcting faults, but set up 3 good qualities that you want to develop for yourself. You want to be very generous and helpful to others. You make the determination, I'll find ways to give to worthy causes or to help others. I will be, again, vigorous and energetic in undertaking any good practices. I will be, if you have a tendency to be deceitful in your speech, I will adhere strictly to the truth, and so forth. When you make these determinations, they're sort of changing the direction of your mind, moving the mind in a beneficial direction, creating new sort of habit formations in the mind, which, as those habit formations gather strength and sort of weave together with each other, then they become the texture of your character. Okay, so those are some of the good qualities to be developed, to develop what I call inner virtue. Now I want to touch on some of the other qualities mentioned in the sutta, or practices, which lead to the development of wisdom. So within these verses, there are 3 qualities that are mentioned, and I will take them in a slightly different order. One is called samana nancha dasana, the seeing of renunciants, which in the Buddhist context means seeing monastic persons, those who have renounced the household life, because they serve as the models that one is striving to follow, and also as sources of teaching. So to receive teachings, one goes to see renunciants, or even if it's not formal monastics, but those who have the qualifications of being Dharma teachers. And then that is the basis for what's called the next one, listening to the Dharma at the appropriate time. So when you have time, then you find the opportunity to listen to discourses on the Dharma. Of course, this was spoken by the Buddha during in a pre-literate culture when there were not books on the Dhamma, not published books. So in order to learn the Dhamma in ancient times, you had to go to a teacher and listen to a discourse. Nowadays, you can learn the Dhamma by reading the books, but still I would say that there's a certain benefit that comes from actually seeing a teacher and getting it directly from the teacher's mouth. Because then you're getting it not just through the printed medium, but you're getting the kind of distilled experience from a teacher. So at the right time, you listen to the Dhamma. And the Buddha, in other discourses, he lays down a progressive process of learning the Dhamma, which begins with listening to the Dhamma. But after listening to the Dhamma, what one has to do is to, in the Buddhist time, this was very important, you memorize the teaching. Because in the Buddhist time, as I said, no printed books to go back and refer to, but you have to retain the teachings in mind. And this is why the Buddhist teachings are laid out to such a large extent, they're laid down in numerical lists, because numerical lists make it easy to memorize the teaching. So you learn the teachings by retaining them in mind. Then one has to examine the meaning of the teaching. So you don't just listen blindly and accept the teaching out of blind faith, but you have to investigate to determine the meaning of the teaching. And if you really want to get an extensive understanding of the Dhamma, then you take these teachings that you've heard on this occasion and try to connect them with other teachings that you've heard on other occasions in order to get a very broad, comprehensive perspective on the Dhamma. And then the next step, the Buddha says, is to penetrate the teachings with wisdom. So you examine the meaning. When you understand the meaning, then you have to practice in order to see the truth of the teaching for oneself. So that is timely hearing of the Dhamma. And the next factor mentioned in this discourse is discussions on the Dhamma. So when you listen to the Dhamma or learn the Dhamma or study the Dhamma, then you get a particular understanding, which is to some extent determined by your own background, your own interests, your own dispositions. And it could be a correct and accurate understanding, or it could be a wrong misunderstanding. But to ensure that you have a correct understanding, it's useful to engage in discussions with others. So if you have a teacher that you can refer to, then you can go to the teacher and present your understanding or to pose questions and then have a discussion on the Dhamma. If you don't have a personal teacher yourself, but you have other friends who are your Dhamma friends, then you can have regular Dhamma discussions in which you maybe take a particular sutta or particular Dhamma principle and discuss it with your friends. Then you get multiple points of view, which helps to maybe correct your own misunderstanding or to confirm your understanding if it's correct, or to broaden your understanding so that you see a particular principle from different points of view. Okay, so once you've listened to the teaching, discussed the teaching, examined the meaning, and gained some insight into the teaching, then on that basis, one practices in order to gain direct realization of the teaching. Okay, maybe this can do for my basic exposition. So these are just sort of just like to sum up. So these, I spoke about leading a life of true meaning and purpose that will be beneficial to yourself and beneficial to others. So what I would say is that to lead such a life, one should make the effort to develop these good qualities of ethical discipline through living in accordance with the precepts, developing such qualities as reverence, humility, contentment, gratitude, and patience, being willing to accept advice from others, then listening to the Dhamma, studying the Dhamma, discussing the Dhamma with others, and putting the Dhamma into practice so that one can gain deeper insights into the Dhamma. Okay, so maybe we could have some time for questions and discussion. So please feel free to ask, any questions, either based on this talk or any other questions that have occurred to you. Yeah, I think a good way to do this, I see that we have the participants list. What you could do, and this is what I do with my Saturday morning class, if you click that hand icon, then I'll see that your hand is up, and then I can call on you. Sawyer, did you have the question?
I do, yeah, thank you. I had a question. It seems like, especially as university students, we are worrying about our grades and we're worrying about a career. And so it seems like a lot of our thoughts are dominated by anxiety and fear.
Yeah.
And so what are some qualities that we can, or maybe temperaments that we can cultivate in order to look deeply and try to address that fear and anxiety?
Yeah, I recognize that's a very big problem faced by university students. So this is where I would say that I didn't touch on this in my talk, but I would say that it's useful every day, even though you have a very full schedule of, classes and homework, to find some time to set aside, even if it's just for short periods of maybe like 20 minutes or 30 minutes, where you can sit and devote that time to the practice of we call mindfulness meditation, making the effort to bring your mind. We start off with like a very simple subject like attention to the breath, wherever you can experience the breathing most clearly and distinctly. And then observing what goes on in the mind during the effort to remain mindful of the breath. And what that does is to bring to the surface, it's a kind of clearing device that brings to the surface all of the kind of thoughts, feelings, emotions that run through the mind as undercurrents during one's day-to-day activities. And it brings them up to the surface so that they stare you right in your face. And that gives you the opportunity to understand the workings of your mind. So when the anxiety and worry arises, then you can face it and even just sit with it, watching the worry, watching the anxiety, and letting those thoughts of worry and anxiety settle, let them run through the mind, watching them and observing them until they run their course, and then the mind will settle down. And this will help you to know how to deal with worry and anxiety when it arises in the midst of your activities. It gives you a kind of skillful device that you can apply. So when you find yourself like starting to get worried, starting to get anxious, then you can just pause for a moment and just turn first to a few breaths, mindfully breathing in and out, watch the anxiety or worry, and just realize being anxious and worried is not going to help me succeed, but it's even going to be like an obstacle. And then you also have to have the attitude, whether I succeed or I fail in my endeavors. Of course, one should make the effort to succeed, but whether I succeed or don't succeed, I'm still a worthy human being, that I don't have to judge myself on the basis of my external achievements. But what's really like critical in life is being a good person and a wise person. That is the true mark of value in one's life.
Hello. Do you mind if I ask a question?
Yeah, that's what I've invited
Awesome.
people to us. Yeah.
Perfect. Thank you so much for your talk. I really appreciate it. I definitely realized one thing that I need to do a little bit better on and want to develop is gratification, and that's something I gotten out of this. But my question for you is how to determine wisdom in truth. Is it something that's gained with time, with knowledge, or more so discussion? And like, where have you found truth resides, I guess, is my question.
Yeah, what I say that there are different types of wisdom,
Yeah.
and maybe even the word wisdom is very ambiguous. So I would say that there are different types of wisdom. I would say that I make the distinction of practical wisdom and liberating wisdom. Okay, the practical wisdom, I would say, is the ability to distinguish. I'll use the words that he used typically in the Buddhist discourses, the ability to distinguish what is wholesome and what is unwholesome. What is unwholesome would be qualities, inner qualities, as well as actions that are harmful to oneself, and harmful to others. And wholesome qualities would be qualities that are beneficial to oneself and beneficial to others. So at the practical level, wisdom would be, of course, one has to start with some knowledge, that arises before wisdom, knowledge of what are the qualities that are said to be unwholesome and what are the qualities said to be wholesome. And so in Buddhism, we say the unwholesome qualities will be qualities like greed or selfishness, anger and hatred and resentment, arrogance, conceit, envy, jealousy, competitiveness, lack of gratitude, discontent, doubt, agitation, and so forth, violence, intention of harming others. So those are various unwholesome qualities. And the wholesome qualities would be the qualities which are truly beneficial to oneself, truly beneficial to others, like kindness, compassion, rejoicing in the good of others, generosity, self-discipline, patience, gratitude, contentment, equanimity, and so forth. So first one knows what are unwholesome, what are wholesome, and then wisdom would be the ability at a practical level to discern, to recognize those qualities, the unwholesome qualities when they arise within oneself. And then one applies the effort not to act on them, not to be swept away by them, but to apply the appropriate remedy or antidote to overcome them and to develop in their place the wholesome qualities, the good qualities. And so wisdom would be the ability to distinguish, as I said, in one's personal interactions from day to day, the unwholesome states of mind when they arise, and to overcome them, at least to keep them at bay, and to apply the appropriate remedy. And wisdom is also the intention and the effort to develop the good, wholesome qualities of character. So that would be practical wisdom, or at least one aspect of practical wisdom. Then the liberating wisdom from Buddhism, in Buddhism, would be the seeing of the true nature of things, seeing things as they really are. And then the way the Buddha expounds this in his teachings, he mentions three qualities or three characteristics that are said to be the universal characteristics of all phenomena. One is impermanence, the other is unsatisfactoriness, the third is, we call this anatta, the absence of a substantial self. So those are the truths that are to be penetrated at the highest level with insight wisdom through the systematic development of meditation. But when I would say that even if one is not developing meditation to this very high level, one could still use these ideas as themes for reflection in order to live with wisdom in one's everyday life. For example, take the idea of impermanence. Like I say that we have at the base of the mind a kind of inherent clinging to the idea of permanence, that we ourselves are going to live forever. Of course, we don't accept this intellectually, but it's there as, I would call this, a kind of instinctual conviction, or a kind of premise or presupposition that we're going to endure forever, and our loved ones are going to endure forever, and the things that we enjoy are going to last forever. And so as we grow old and we lose our strength, our vitality, This is a revelation of impermanence. But if we don't have this understanding of impermanence, then we become worried, upset, anxious, disturbed. I'm growing old, or I'm falling sick, or even I'm facing death. So then one becomes falls into a panic. But if one has done a regular reflection on impermanence, then when these changes take place, or when loved ones pass away, then of course one will feel grief in that case, but one uses the wisdom of impermanence to be able to overcome one's anxiety in the face of one's own death and one's grief in the face of the death of loved ones. Yeah, so I would say, like, even using that theme of reflection on impermanence, that everything and everyone one loves is going to pass away at some point. I myself am going to pass away. That is maybe the beginning of the liberating wisdom.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Sawyer, do you have another question?
I do, yeah.
Yeah.
I had a question concerning the relationship between the cultivation of, I guess, these virtues and temperaments, and also the cultivation of meditation.
Yeah.
So is like the cultivation of virtue and these temperaments, is this, I guess, uniquely separate or uniquely different from what you would normally do during meditation? Or are both of them like support one another? Like, can you do one without the other?
I would say that they are mutually supportive, and one can do, sometimes people think that meditation means that you just sit cross-legged and you try to empty your mind or focus your mind just on one point, one simple object like the breath or some visible form. But one can do, and what I found actually very useful to do, is meditative practices, which are reflections on the qualities that one wants to develop. Like when I spoke a few minutes ago about setting apart some time every day just to do a short reflection on the qualities that the faults that one wants to overcome and the antidotes that one wants to develop. That is a kind of meditation. So if we look at some of the meditation subjects that the Buddha taught, like he mentions a meditation on sila, on virtuous conduct. So in that meditation, what you do is you reflect on the qualities or the precepts that one wants to observe. One reflects on the precept of abstaining from the destruction of life, on abstaining from stealing, from sexual misconduct, from false speech, from the use of intoxicants. So when one undertakes these five precepts, then one reflects, I am observing these five precepts, and one reflects on the precepts. And in that way, one develops an appreciation of one's, let's say, one's ethical integrity, one's moral integrity, one's ethical commitments, and that will bring a sense of joy. And the way the Buddha explains this, it's one place one reflects that, say, when I undertake the precept to abstain from the destruction of life, then all other living beings can feel safe in my presence, at least in the human world, let's say. No other human being has to be afraid of me, that I'm going to harm them or destroy their life or cause them injury. And the same with stealing, sexual misconduct, false speech, and so on. And so when one reflects that one is not harming others, but one is acting in ways beneficial to others, that is a kind of meditation that can bring inner joy. Also, another reflection or reflective meditation is generosity. So when you practice giving to worthy causes, then one turns back inward, and one inwardly reflects, not to build up one's ego, one's pride, I'm a generous person, but one reflects how one is helping people in need and how one is using one's wealth and resources to be of benefit to others. And then when one reflects in that way and reflects on generosity, that will bring joy to the mind. And then there are specific meditations on loving, these are called the 4 divine abodes: loving kindness, compassion, sympathetic joy, and equanimity. Jia Yin?
Yes. Yeah. Thank you, Bande, for your wonderful talk. And I think it's helped me to reflect on the daily life, like how to be a good person. You mentioned about this content, because like people have like various cravings, and seeing others have what they don't have, and they start to like have this unwholesome thought. Like my question is, sometimes I realize I have like this craving thought. Like, for example, I want to eat some food from my house. Like, but the problem is, even if I realize this, but I still to doing it. So, so it just seems like even if I notice the craving thought, I couldn't change anything, or I still to like give still on this path. So I don't know. Do you have any insight on this? Or did I like explain myself correct?
I didn't quite understand. Did you say you had some craving for food in your house?
Yeah, and also like in daily life, okay, I want this and I want that. So I noticed that I have this craving thought, but it just didn't change anything. I still, okay, I buy this stuff and I buy that. But,
okay. Yeah, when we speak about contentment, I'd say one doesn't expect oneself to like overcome every kind of craving immediately at once, just with an act of mental determination. But I say what we have to do is to sort of at least recognize the types of craving that are going to be really harmful, either to other people or to oneself, the kind of obsessions, addictions that are harmful, and initially try to control those kinds of cravings and be content, reasonably content. But it doesn't mean that you just sort of settle back and never make any effort to improve either your material living conditions or your, let's say your job status or the work that you undertake. But yeah, so when you're undergoing your education in college or university, you don't want to be just content with getting by from day to day, but you want to get good grades, and then go on to either to a good graduate school or to get a good job. So that's kind of natural desire of the mind and essential for leading a happy and fulfilling life. But I'd say what has to be controlled are the excessive cravings, the cravings that go beyond and that really cause disturbance in your own mind, and that make you a source of disturbance for others. And so it's a gradual process. And even, for us who have been monks for 40 years, we're not perfectly content with everything. Like back before the COVID-19 came around, sometimes I would say to one of my students after the class, let's go into town and get some ice cream. It's the craving for ice during the summer, the craving for ice cream would come.
Thank you, Bande. That is helpful. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, so any further questions? Again, you could use the hand symbol. Okay, I don't see any further questions.
If there's no further questions, I want to extend my deepest gratitude for you, Bhante, for joining us today and giving us your time and taking so much effort to provide us with such a helpful and insightful teaching for us to carry forward into our lives.
Yeah,
And
I'm curious, by the way, are the students here, are you graduate students or undergraduate?
I'm an undergraduate student. However, I believe Jain is a graduate student, so it's a mix. And there are also
I see.
faculty who joined us too.
I see.
Yeah, so thank you so much for joining us, and thank you everyone for also joining. Yeah, and hope you have a great rest of your week, Bhante, and I hope that everyone else does too.
Okay, thank you so much. Yeah.
Thank you, Bande.
Thank you, Bande.
Okay,
Thank you, Bande.
Thank you so much for the talk.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
We're looking forward to future talks.
Okay.
Thank you.